Greenland exists far beyond the networks that organize most of the modern world. It is not defined by connection or accessibility. Distance here is not an obstacle to overcome, but a condition that shapes everything that follows. This is a landmass of continental scale, with a population smaller than many towns elsewhere. Roads do not link its settlements. Movement depends on air, ice, and weather rather than infrastructure. Time adjusts to light. Plans yield to wind and temperature. Here, nature does not frame human activity. It governs it. Ice determines where travel is possible. Storms decide when movement stops. Silence fills long intervals where nothing competes for attention. The environment remains active even when human presence recedes. Greenland feels separate, not because it is empty, but because it operates without urgency. Systems move slowly. Change accumulates gradually. Scale replaces speed as the dominant force. This is not a place shaped to receive visitors. It continues on its own terms, governed by ice, weather, and distance, regardless of who passes through. The Greenland ice sheet is not a feature of the landscape, it is the landscape. Covering most of the island, it rises and falls like a frozen continent, shaping everything around it long before any settlement appeared and long after any human presence fades. This ice did not form quickly. It accumulated layer by layer over hundreds of thousands of years. Snow compressed into ice. Ice thickened under its own weight. What seems solid and immovable is, in reality, slowly flowing outward from the island's interior. Gravity pulls it toward the coast, millimeter by millimeter, day after day. Standing near the ice, scale becomes difficult to judge. The surface stretches beyond the horizon, flat and deceptively calm. But beneath that surface, pressure builds. Cracks form silently. Entire sections move as a single mass, advancing without urgency and without pause. This is not frozen water at rest, it is a system in motion. Movement at this scale feels abstract, but its consequences are tangible, shaping coastlines, ecosystems, and human decisions far beyond the ice itself. The ice sheet controls far more than terrain. It influences weather patterns, ocean currents, and seasonal rhythms across the island. Cold air descends from its surface, shaping winds along the coast. Meltwater feeds rivers that surge briefly each summer before disappearing again under snow. Even life at the edges of Greenland adjusts to the presence of this frozen core. Scientists study the ice sheet not because it is dramatic, but because it is revealing. Each layer stores information about past climates, volcanic eruptions, and shifts in the atmosphere. Drilling into the ice is not an act of exploration, but of reading. The deeper the sample, the further back in time it reaches. Yet this massive system is not immune to change. Warmer summers alter the balance between accumulation and loss. Meltwater carves channels across the surface and drains downward through vertical shafts. Ice that took millennia to form can begin to retreat within decades. The movement remains slow, but the direction is no longer guaranteed. Despite its size, the ice sheet does not dominate through force. It dominates through persistence. It reshapes land not by impact, but by duration. Valleys deepen. Coastlines adjust. Everything downstream responds to what happens here, far inland, far from the sea. The Greenland ice sheet does not announce itself. It does not perform. It simply continues, moving steadily outward, indifferent to observation, carrying the weight of time toward the edges of the island. Jakobshavn Glacier, known locally as Sermilik, is where the movement of the ice sheet becomes impossible to ignore. This is not a distant process unfolding inland. Here, ice reaches the sea directly, releasing its mass into the ocean with regular force. The glacier drains a vast portion of Greenland's interior. Ice that formed thousands of years ago funnels through a narrow corridor, accelerating as it approaches the coast. In some sections, the glacier advances faster than almost any other on Earth. Speed, at this scale, does not feel dramatic. It feels inevitable. The surface appears fractured and uneven. Deep crevasses cut across the ice, exposing layers compressed over immense spans of time. These fractures are not signs of weakness. They are evidence of stress redistributed as the glacier adjusts to pressure and slope. Every crack marks movement already underway. At the glacier's front, the boundary between ice and ocean remains unstable. Sections break away without warning. Blocks the size of buildings detach and collapse into the water, sending waves across the fjord. The sound carries far, echoing against rock and ice. This is not an event. It is a repeated outcome of continued flow. Once released, the ice does not disappear immediately. It becomes icebergs, drifting outward into Disko Bay. Some rotate slowly. Others remain grounded, locked in place until conditions change. Their presence alters water circulation and light penetration, affecting marine life that depends on cold, nutrient-rich currents. Jakobshavn's influence extends well beyond what is visible. Changes in its speed affect how quickly ice from the interior is transferred to the sea. This balance matters. When discharge increases, the ice sheet loses mass more rapidly. The glacier becomes a channel through which long-term accumulation meets short-term change. Researchers monitor Jakobshavn closely, not because it is unique, but because it is responsive. Variations in ocean temperature, ice thickness, and surface melt are reflected here sooner than elsewhere. The glacier acts as an indicator, translating subtle shifts into measurable movement. Despite constant attention, the glacier remains indifferent. It does not accelerate for observation or slow for caution. It continues according to pressure, slope, and temperature. Human timelines do not apply at this interface. Jakobshavn Glacier is not a spectacle created for viewing. It is a working edge of the ice sheet, where time, gravity, and water converge, releasing the weight of Greenland toward the sea. Ilulissat sits beside constant movement. The town does not face open water in the usual sense. It faces ice. Ice that arrives daily, reshapes the shoreline, and fills the horizon with slow, shifting forms. For residents, this presence is not exceptional. It is routine. The town's layout reflects that reality. There are no roads leaving Ilulissat. Movement outward depends on boats, air, or ice itself. The boundary between land and sea is never fixed. Icebergs gather, drift, rotate, and sometimes remain in place for weeks. The view changes, but the condition remains the same. Life here adjusts to that rhythm. Schedules follow light and season rather than clocks. Winter compresses activity. Summer stretches it. Fishing routes shift depending on ice density and water access. Decisions are practical, shaped by what the fjord allows on a given day. Despite the scale outside the town, Ilulissat functions calmly. Homes are modest. Infrastructure remains minimal. There is no attempt to compete with the landscape. Instead, the town exists within it, accepting limits without resistance. What cannot be controlled is simply accounted for. The ice dominates perception. It reflects light differently at every hour. In winter, it absorbs sound, muting the environment. In summer, meltwater channels form across its surface, adding motion to what already feels active. The presence of ice is visual, auditory, and physical all at once. Tourism arrives because of this proximity. Visitors come to witness the ice up close. For them, the sight feels extraordinary. For locals, it is familiar. The difference lies not in what is seen, but in how it is interpreted. What feels overwhelming to an outsider becomes background to daily life. This familiarity does not reduce respect. If anything, it reinforces caution. The ice behaves predictably only over long periods. Short-term changes remain difficult to anticipate. Movement continues regardless of observation. Awareness remains necessary. Ilulissat exists at the edge of one of Greenland's most active systems. It does not attempt to define that system or control it. The town endures by aligning itself with a process that began long before it and will continue long after. Here, the presence of ice is not a spectacle. It is a condition, one that shapes space, time, and routine without demanding attention, yet never allowing itself to be ignored. Disko Bay is where Greenland's ice lingers. Icebergs released from nearby glaciers do not pass through quickly. They gather here, slow down, and often remain for long periods, held in place by shallow waters and shifting currents. Movement continues, but it is restrained, stretched over time. The bay becomes a temporary resting ground for ice that has already traveled far. Massive blocks rotate gradually, exposing new surfaces to light and water. Some ground themselves on the seabed, becoming fixed points in an otherwise fluid environment. Others drift slowly, guided by wind more than tide. The scene feels crowded, yet calm. This accumulation changes how the bay functions. Water circulation slows. Cold temperatures persist longer into the year. Marine life adapts to these conditions. Nutrients concentrate beneath the ice, supporting fish, seals, and whales that move through the area seasonally. The ice is not an obstacle to life here. It is part of the structure that sustains it. Sound behaves differently in Disko Bay. Ice creaks, shifts, and occasionally fractures. These noises carry across the water, amplified by still air and open space. The bay rarely feels silent, yet it never feels loud. Activity unfolds at a scale that resists urgency. Human activity adjusts accordingly. Boats navigate carefully between icebergs, following routes that change daily. Familiar passages can close without warning. New paths appear briefly, then vanish. Experience matters more than maps. Knowledge is local and temporary. The bay's appearance shifts with light. During long summer days, ice reflects pale blues and whites, creating a sense of openness despite congestion. In winter, darkness compresses space. Ice blends into the horizon, making distance difficult to judge. Orientation relies on memory and subtle cues rather than clear landmarks. Disko Bay does not feel transitional. It feels suspended. Ice arrives here and waits. It does not hurry toward the open ocean. It pauses, rotates, melts slowly, and eventually continues onward. This delay stretches the life of each iceberg, extending its influence on water, weather, and movement. For those passing through, the bay can feel timeless. For those who live nearby, it is familiar but never static. Conditions repeat without duplicating themselves. No 2 days arrange the ice in the same way. Disko Bay is not defined by arrival or departure. It is defined by presence. Ice remains long enough to shape the environment, then leaves quietly, making room for the next slow procession drifting in from the north. Eqip Sermia is one of the few places where the scale of glacial movement becomes immediately physical. The ice face stands close to the water, tall and exposed, offering little distance between observer and process. There is no sense of safety created by separation. What happens here happens nearby. The glacier's front is constantly under tension. Ice pushes forward from behind while the ocean undermines it from below. This imbalance resolves itself through collapse. Large sections break away without warning, striking the water with force and sending waves outward across the fjord. The sound arrives a moment later, sharp and unmistakable. These events are frequent enough to feel expected, but never predictable. Minutes can pass in complete stillness, followed by sudden release. The glacier does not signal its movements in advance. It responds only to pressure, temperature, and gravity. Observation offers no control. Eqip Sermia reveals how quickly long-term accumulation can transform into immediate change. Ice that took centuries to form can disintegrate in seconds. The contrast between formation and release is stark. Time compresses here, turning duration into impact. Despite the violence of collapse, the glacier remains measured. Nothing accelerates beyond its limits. After each break, the front settles briefly before advancing again. The cycle continues, steady and unhurried. What feels dramatic to a human scale is simply part of ongoing adjustment. Wildlife occupies the space around the glacier without hesitation. Birds circle above the ice face, feeding where cold water rises after each collapse. Seals rest on floating fragments, using the ice as shelter rather than obstacle. Life positions itself around movement, not away from it. Human presence remains temporary. Boats approach carefully, aware that distance is the only reliable margin. There are no permanent structures here. Nothing attempts to hold ground against the glacier's reach. Visitors come to witness the process, then leave, understanding that this edge belongs to the ice. Light changes the glacier's character throughout the day. Shadows deepen fractures. Reflections emphasize height. At certain angles, the surface appears smooth and motionless, concealing the stress beneath. The illusion lasts only until the next release breaks it. Eqip Sermia does not invite interpretation. It presents a process in its raw form. Ice advances, pressure builds, collapse follows. The sequence repeats without regard for attention, leaving behind waves, fragments, and a reminder of how quickly scale can shift from slow to immediate. Sermilik fjord feels heavier than other places along Greenland's coast. The space is narrower, the walls steeper, and the water darker. Ice moves through this corridor slowly, pressed between rock and current, carrying the weight of the interior toward the open ocean. At the head of the fjord lies Helheim Glacier. It is one of the main outlets of the ice sheet on Greenland's eastern side. Ice funnels through a confined channel, accelerating as it descends from the interior plateau. Here, movement is constant, but never smooth. The glacier advances, fractures, and releases its mass in uneven cycles. Helheim does not behave quietly. Large sections of ice detach frequently, collapsing into the fjord with force. The sound travels far, amplified by the surrounding cliffs. Waves rebound off the rock walls and return toward the glacier, colliding with floating ice already filling the channel. Nothing settles for long. The fjord amplifies scale. Icebergs here feel taller, more imposing. Some ground themselves temporarily, wedged between shallow points along the fjord floor. Others drift slowly, rotating as currents pull unevenly along their submerged edges. Navigation becomes careful and deliberate. Routes exist, but they change without warning. This environment is closely watched by researchers. Helheim responds quickly to changes in ocean temperature and ice thickness. When warmer water reaches the glacier's base, retreat accelerates. When conditions stabilize, the glacier can advance again. These shifts make Helheim a sensitive indicator of broader change within the ice sheet. Despite this attention, the glacier remains indifferent. It does not move faster because it is measured, nor does it pause for observation. Pressure from behind continues to push ice forward. Gravity does the rest. The process remains mechanical, governed by forces that do not adapt to human concern. Wildlife navigates this system instinctively. Seals rest on fragments near the fjord's edges. Birds follow nutrient-rich upwellings created by falling ice. Life arranges itself around movement rather than avoiding it. Instability becomes a constant rather than a threat. Sermilik Fjord does not offer relief or openness. It concentrates everything. Ice, sound, motion, and scale are compressed into a single corridor. There is no wide horizon here, only forward movement toward the sea. Helheim Glacier marks a working edge of Greenland's eastern ice. What happens here is not symbolic. It is physical, ongoing, and consequential. Ice formed deep inland completes its journey through this narrow passage, released into the fjord and carried onward, continuing a process that does not pause or conclude. Nuuk does not feel like a capital in the conventional sense. It is small, spread along the coast, and closely bound to the landscape around it. The city does not dominate its surroundings, it fits into them. Colorful buildings line the shoreline, not as decoration, but as practical markers against snow, fog, and long winter darkness. Life here follows conditions more than schedules. Weather determines movement. Light shapes daily rhythm. In winter, activity compresses inward. In summer, it expands outward toward the water. Fishing boats, small harbors, and coastal paths define the city's edges. There is no separation between urban life and the natural systems it depends on. Despite its size, Nuuk functions as a center of administration, culture, and connection. Supplies arrive by sea or air. Nothing arrives quickly. Planning accounts for delay. Self-reliance is not an idea here. It is routine. Modern infrastructure exists, but it operates within narrow limits set by geography and climate. Just above the waterfront, the National Museum of Greenland offers a different sense of time. Inside, the pace slows further. Artifacts and exhibits are arranged without spectacle. Tools, clothing, and carved objects reflect a history shaped by survival rather than expansion. Every item carries evidence of adaptation. The museum's most striking presence comes from its quietness. Preserved remains and everyday objects speak to lives lived under conditions similar to those that still exist outside. Cold preserved what time might otherwise erase. The environment itself became an archive. This continuity blurs the line between past and present. The challenges faced by earlier inhabitants were not abstract. They were immediate and physical. Navigation, hunting, and shelter followed the same constraints that shape modern life along the coast. Technology has changed, but the governing forces remain familiar. Nuuk reflects this overlap clearly. Snowmobiles replace dog sleds in some contexts. Communication is faster. Materials are lighter. Yet decisions are still filtered through weather, ice conditions, and seasonal light. Progress adapts rather than replaces. The museum does not frame history as distant or resolved. It presents it as ongoing. Tools evolve, but needs remain consistent. Warmth, food, and movement continue to define daily life. The artifacts do not feel obsolete. They feel instructive. Together, Nuuk and the museum reveal a coastal life built on adjustment rather than control. The city does not attempt to outgrow its environment. It works within it. The past is not preserved as nostalgia. It is preserved as reference. Life on Greenland's coast continues through awareness, restraint, and practical knowledge passed forward rather than discarded. Nuuk stands not as a break from that history, but as its current expression, shaped by the same forces that shaped everything before it. Kangerlussuaq exists for movement, not for permanence. The settlement grew around access rather than community, positioned inland where geography allows a rare connection between air, land, and ice. Its long runway reflects that purpose. This is where most journeys into Greenland begin or end. The surrounding landscape feels exposed and transitional. Mountains soften into wide valleys. Vegetation thins. The climate here is more continental, colder in winter and warmer in summer than the coast. Winds move freely across open ground, shaping conditions without interruption. Kangerlussuaq functions as a threshold. Supplies arrive, travelers pass through, and research teams prepare to move inland. There is little incentive to linger. The settlement does not attempt to become a destination. It remains practical, defined by what it enables rather than what it offers. Beyond the town, the land stretches outward with minimal markers. Roads extend farther here than almost anywhere else in Greenland, but they do not lead to other cities. They lead inward, toward ice. Leaving Kangerlussuaq, the environment shifts quickly. Gravel gives way to exposed rock. The horizon flattens. The sense of distance increases, even as movement becomes more constrained. Russell Glacier stands close to this transition point, marking a visible edge of the ice sheet. Unlike glaciers that meet the sea, Russell remains grounded on land. Its face rises sharply from the valley floor, fractured and irregular, revealing layers compressed over immense spans of time. The glacier advances steadily, pressing forward from the interior. Meltwater pours from its base during warmer months, carving channels through sediment and rock. The sound of moving water contrasts with the stillness of the ice above, emphasizing the scale difference between formation and release. Russell Glacier makes the ice sheet tangible. There is no fjord, no buffer of water. Ice meets land directly. Collapse here sends debris outward rather than waves. The process feels slower, heavier, more restrained. Researchers frequent the area because access is relatively straightforward. Monitoring equipment tracks movement and melt, capturing changes that unfold gradually rather than dramatically. The glacier responds to seasonal shifts, advancing and retreating within narrow margins. Russell does not perform, it continues. Its presence, reinforces the idea that Greenland's interior is not distant or abstract. It presses outward, visible and active, even far from the coast. Sermilik is one of the few places in Greenland where continuity feels visible. The town has grown, but not abruptly. It remains tied to fishing, hunting, and seasonal movement, even as modern infrastructure slowly expands. This balance defines daily life. Change happens, but it does not erase what came before. Unlike most settlements, Sermilik has roads. They do not lead far, but they connect neighborhoods, workshops, and harbor areas. Fishing remains central. Equipment shifts with the seasons. Boats give way to snowmobiles. Storage areas fill and empty in cycles that repeat each year. Life here is structured by return rather than novelty. The town faces open water for part of the year and solid ice for another. Each state brings its own rhythm. In winter, activity compresses inward. In summer, it spreads along the coast. Sermilik adapts without trying to resolve this contrast. Both conditions are expected. Neither feels temporary. North of Sermilik, the coastline becomes more fragmented. Settlements thin, mountains rise steeper from the sea. Access narrows, and movement depends increasingly on weather and ice rather than infrastructure. The sense of isolation deepens, not through absence, but through distance. Nuuk appears suddenly against this backdrop. The mountain that gives the town its name dominates the horizon, rising sharply above clustered homes along the shoreline. The settlement feels smaller, more compact, shaped tightly around what the land allows. Here, traditional practices remain essential rather than symbolic. Dog sleds are not cultural artifacts, they are working tools. In winter, they provide reliable movement when machines struggle. Dogs are trained, maintained, and respected as part of daily life, not as heritage displays. Seasonal extremes are more pronounced. Light stretches endlessly in summer and disappears almost entirely in winter. Daily routines adjust accordingly. Time becomes elastic. Work intensifies during favorable conditions and pauses when the environment closes in. Despite the severity, Nuuk does not feel fragile. It feels precise. Everything has a role. Waste is minimized. Movement is intentional. Decisions carry weight because margins are narrow. The town persists through attention rather than expansion. Together, Sermilik and Nuuk illustrate two expressions of northern life. One grows carefully without breaking its foundation. The other remains compact, maintaining practices that continue to function under pressure. Neither resist change. Both adapt to it on their own terms. In this part of Greenland, continuity is not maintained through preservation. It is maintained through use. Tools, routes, and routines survive because they still work. Northern communities endure not by standing still, but by adjusting carefully, season after season. Farther north, the landscape opens into a scale that feels less occupied and more absolute. Fjords widen, distances stretch, and signs of regular human activity become rare. This is where Greenland begins to feel less like a country and more like a condition defined by latitude, ice, and time. Scoresby Sund dominates this region. It is the largest fjord system on Earth, a network of deep channels carved by ice over immense periods. Icebergs drift slowly through these passages, some grounded, others rotating gradually as currents shift beneath them. The system does not guide movement, it absorbs it. The surrounding land is vast and largely unmarked. Rock formations rise sharply from the water, layered and exposed. Vegetation is sparse. Wildlife moves through the area seasonally, following routes shaped by ice and water rather than habit. The sense of scale is continuous, without interruption. Further north, Kangerlussuaq represents one of the northernmost points of permanent settlement. Life here unfolds under extreme conditions. Winter darkness extends for months. Summer light does the same. Time loses conventional structure, defined instead by presence or absence of sun. Hunting remains central. Marine mammals provide food, materials, and continuity. Dog sleds continue to function where machines fail, especially when temperatures drop and sea ice stabilizes. Movement depends on experience rather than navigation systems. Knowledge is accumulated locally and passed on directly. Modern infrastructure exists, but it operates within narrow margins. Supply routes are limited. Delays are common. Planning focuses on essentials. Excess has little place here. The environment enforces restraint through scale and remoteness. The land surrounding Kangerlussuaq offers no shelter from its conditions. Wind moves freely. Ice advances and retreats along the coast. Mistakes cannot be absorbed easily. The margin between stability and exposure remains thin. Despite this, the settlement persists, not through expansion, but through precision. Life is organized carefully around what is necessary and what is possible. Community functions as a system of shared awareness, where responsibility extends beyond the individual. Scoresby Sund and Kangerlussuaq together define Greenland's far north as a place where presence is deliberate. Nothing arrives casually. Nothing remains without purpose. The landscape does not soften with familiarity. It remains dominant, requiring constant attention. Here, the idea of frontier loses meaning. There is no sense of moving beyond this region. It exists at the limit, not as an endpoint, but as a stable edge where human life continues only through alignment with conditions that never relax. Northeast Greenland National Park occupies a scale that resists comprehension. It is the largest protected area on Earth, larger than many countries combined, yet it holds no permanent population. There are no towns, no roads, and no infrastructure beyond a few research stations and patrol outposts. Human presence here is temporary by design. The park exists as a decision rather than a destination. Its boundaries protect systems that function without supervision. Ice caps, mountains, fjords, and tundra operate under long-established rhythms, uninterrupted by development or regular access. What happens here unfolds whether anyone is watching or not. Movement through the park is slow and conditional. Weather dictates timing. Ice determines routes. Distances expand quickly, turning short journeys into multi-day efforts. Navigation depends on experience rather than signage. The land offers no guidance beyond what it physically allows. Wildlife occupies the space sparsely but decisively. Polar bears range across vast areas, following ice and prey rather than territory lines. Musk oxen move deliberately across tundra, conserving energy. Arctic foxes traverse enormous distances, responding to seasonal shifts that are barely visible to outsiders. Life persists here through efficiency, not abundance. The absence of permanent settlement does not imply inactivity. Processes continue continuously. Ice advances and retreats. Snow accumulates and compresses. Rivers form briefly each summer, then vanish beneath new layers of ice. The system remains dynamic, even in apparent stillness. Human activity, when it occurs, is minimal and regulated. Patrols monitor environmental conditions. Scientists collect data over long intervals, often returning to the same locations years apart. Their work does not seek control or alteration. It seeks understanding through patience. This region emphasizes scale without reference. There are no landmarks intended for orientation. No structures compete with the landscape. The environment remains dominant in every direction. Exposure is constant. Shelter is temporary. The land does not accommodate error. Northeast Greenland National Park represents an intentional absence. It preserves not scenery, but process. By remaining largely untouched, it allows ice, water, and life to continue without compression or acceleration. The value lies not in what can be extracted, but in what remains uninterrupted. In this final expanse, Greenland reaches its most complete form. Space outweighs presence. Duration replaces event. The land exists without expectation, sustaining itself through cycles that extend far beyond human planning. Here, at the edge of habitation, Greenland does not end. It continues, vast and indifferent, carrying forward systems that require no audience to persist. Greenland does not resolve into a conclusion. It does not offer a final image meant to explain everything that came before. What remains is a sense of scale that extends beyond movement, beyond presence, and beyond the act of observation. Across the island, patterns continue without repetition. Ice advances and retreats. Settlements adjust and persist. Wildlife responds to conditions that shift gradually over time. Nothing here depends on attention to exist. Systems continue, whether they are noticed or not. What defines Greenland is not extremity, but consistency. Forces act slowly, without urgency. Change accumulates through duration rather than event. The land does not react, it proceeds. Human activity fits into this process only where it aligns with existing conditions. Distance remains central, not as an obstacle, but as a filter. It limits excess, reshapes priorities, and removes what cannot function under constraint. What remains does so because it works. What does not fades without resistance. Greenland does not invite interpretation or promise transformation. It offers perspective, a reminder that scale alters meaning, that patience replaces urgency, that presence does not require permanence. When the journey ends, Greenland does not pause or conclude. It continues, shaped by ice, weather, and time, carrying forward systems that require no audience to remain real.